Hi, everyone. This is Donna Dracunis with our bi-weekly Procreate and other tech session with Sequential Artists Workshop. We're talking about Procreate today, which I think we've talked about every time so far. But next time, we're going to talk about something else. We're going to talk about Scrivener and how to use it to organize your work and comments. But for today, we're going to continue with Procreate. We're talking about papers, and I want to show you how to use papers for creating texture in your Procreate documents. Sorry, there was a bunch of stuff coming up on the screen for a second, so I had to talk really slow because I can't think and read at the same time. So now I will spotlight my iPad for you and leave my other video on because you can still look at me talking with my hands, which I do a lot. So what we're going to look at today is how to get something like this, texture like this, only maybe not so bold, on a document that was originally like this. So this is totally smooth. There's no paper texture. And here I did a really bad job of putting a paper texture, but you can see if I zoom in that there's a big difference. So we're going to look at different ways to put texture on your Procreate document. And there's several ways that we're going to first look at using layers. And most of the ones I have to show you layers, or perhaps all of them, are ones that you purchase. I haven't discovered free ones that are pre-made with layers like I'm going to show you, except from Skillshare teachers. And then, of course, you have to pay for the Skillshare classes. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to show you how to use brushes, because you can also use brushes to make paper texture over a whole document or over part of it. And then I'm going to show you what you can do if you just download plain scans of paper that aren't set up with the layers, or if you scan or take pictures of paper that you have. And then if we have time, I got a little bit of miscellaneous fun for you. Okay, so we're going to start with the paper layers, and this requires blend modes to get the paper layers to look like watercolor paper. So this is one I bought from Calvin at Drifter Studios. And I'm going to open the layers here. And this group that I have here is what he included in the document. So you can see it has watercolor texture. It has a layer called paper background and a layer that's under basic texture 6. And he just called it inserted image. But that's the part that adds texture to the painted area, and the paper background adds texture to the paper. So I'm going to zoom way in and turn these each off and on so you can see what happens. If I turn the paper background off, the background turns pure white with no texture. And I know it's probably hard to see on the video because, you know, it's white. But there is a difference. It looks like watercolor paper and nothing. If I turn the other one off, the colors turn really flat, and they also get duller or lighter. And that's because of the blend modes that are used. So before we look at the blend modes, let me show you what these papers look like with all of that turned off. So this is the paper background layer set to normal mode with no transparency. And I think even on the screen there, you can see that it's a photograph or a scan of watercolor texture. And you can see that it's like probably a cold press paper, because it's quite a bit of crinkly and texture in the paper. And you can see also that it's very, very light, like an eggshell color, basically. So this layer for the paper background is very light, and it's got watercolor paper texture. This one for the other part, where it decorates or boosts up the color and the texture for the drawing, is also got the watercolor texture in it. It's mostly a gray color, but it's also, as you can see, modeled with different tones and different colors. This part looks a little more greenish blue to me, a little more brown. This is more neutral. And then there's even some, this is real paper because there's even some defects in the paper in there. So he's put those 2 layers in, and then he's set the modes to darker color for the paper background. So that's the white paper, and it's almost white. It's just off white. It's set to darker color and 35%. Now it comes this way if you buy this. You don't have to set any of this up, but I want to just show you how it works, why it works. And then the other image that he's got is set to color burn. I have to unlock it to look. It's set to color burn and 70%. So here's the painting that he did that came as a sample with the paper. And you can see what happens when I turn those layers off. So when you're using paper, depending on how it's set up, but especially if the paper uses a color burn as a blend mode, it's going to make your colors darker than what they look like without the paper. So you want to paint your picture with the paper. You don't want to paint your picture first and then try to add the paper, because it can change all your colors. So this is the basic watercolor paper that came with Calvin at Drifter Studios basic watercolor brush set. That's where I got this one. It came with the brush set. So his brushes are designed to work with this paper. And it also came with a list of all his brushes and the names of them in it, because it was a set I purchased together. So that's the easy way to do it. It's not super expensive. And so it's an easy way to get watercolor paper because everything's set up for you. A lot of people do something similar. This one here that I got is from Brenda Bakker, that I got from one of her Skillshare classes. And so hers came with this group of layers, and you can see she used 4 different papers in it, 4 different layers set to different blend modes to create her paper. If you zoom in, nothing's painted on this yet, so you can't see that. I can add a new layer. And when you do this, you always have the paper textures in the top of your layer stack and you're painting on the bottom. I'm going to pick a color, excuse me. Oops, didn't mean to change the background. I meant to just pick a color for a brush. Now look at the color I just picked. It's pretty light. And look how dark it comes out when I paint with it, with her paper layers on. When I turn them off, see how color change happens? That's because if I look in her layers here, she's got 3 layers set to color burn, and each of those is going to punch up the color more. So what do these layers look like? Blank. So you can see in the layer menu here, just from the little icons, that 3 of them are a light color and 1's a dark color. So I set these all to normal and no transparency change. So the first one's just like Calvin at Drifter Studios. It's just a white, off-white paper of watercolor paper. And she sets hers to multiply. And what that does is it basically only the things that are not white show up. So it works similar to darken when you're working with really light colors like this. Her second layer is a different watercolor texture, and it has a little more color. It's got a little more shadows in it than the first one. The third one has yet more. It actually looks like the same layer, but it's more detail in it. So it's less washed out. And then the last one's a completely different texture. It's kind of like a gouache wash background. So her paper set comes with 4 layers that are preset for you. And of course, you can take off whatever you want if you don't want all of them. The one that's on multiply, if you turn it off again, the paper turns plain white. but the textures stay on the other areas where you painted. So it's essentially the same thing that Calvin at Drifter Studios is doing, but she set it up the way she wanted it, and she used 4 layers to make it. Lisa Bardot has a set too that I was looking at. I didn't get them yet, and hers use up to 5 layers. So this is an issue if you have a smaller iPad and you're making big images and you have to give up 5 layers for the watercolor texture. That can be a problem. This is the same kind of thing that I got from Jennifer Nichols on Skillshare. See, it has a layer to draw on the bottom and then the canvas texture. So I can make my brush bigger. And she's got 3 layers as well. They're a little different. And they still have the same basic blending modes, which is multiply, color burn, color burn. If you find papers from other people, they might use different blending modes. Sometimes I change the blending modes. I might be using this paper, but I want to change it to something else. And so I can do that. You can do that. There's no reason you can't change it. You can change the opacity if you want to turn the texture down more than they have it, or bring it up if you want it to show up more. You can see now I brought this one up so far that it almost looks like I'm working on a gray toned paper rather than a white paper. So you can do this on any of the ones that you buy. The layers will probably be locked when you buy it. So you just swipe left to unlock them. And then you can change the blend modes and the opacity of each of the layers to adjust the texture how you want. Yeah. So those are ones, like I said, that's how they work when you buy them. They're 2 to 5 layers that are in the document. They'll be set to different blend modes and opacities, and then on the bottom of the stack is where you will make your art. So of course, you don't have to work on just one layer. You can make as many layers as you want to paint. And you can use, different brushes and colors. There's nothing constraining what you do here. Nothing constraining what you do here, as long as your paint layers are below the paper texture layers. But also a cool thing is if you put a layer on top of the paper texture layer, then you can add something, bad brush to demo that, you can add something to the top that has no texture, which is something you can't do in real watercolor, but you can do it in digital. So sometimes I'll write something in white on it, and I don't want the watercolor texture on it. Or if I'm doing something that's like a collage, I'll show you a little bit later. You can actually put a different paper texture on each layer in your collage, so it looks like you put multiple different kinds of paper in your digital collage. So,
quick question. Do you suggest that you duplicate the paper layers before you change them, or does it matter?
Just save the original on your, downloads folder or somewhere. Save the original somewhere else, and then, you use it. You bring it into Procreate every time you want to use it.
Every time you want to use it.
Yeah, that's the easiest way. You can, like, how you drag layers and drag them into another document I showed you last week. You can copy and paste these into another document, but you lose the blend modes and the color and the opacity settings. So it's easier to just save the canvas in your special downloads folder. I have a whole folder of downloaded papers. And when I want to use it, I'll be in Procreate at the gallery, and I'll say import. And so right now, this is my, downloaded papers folder. And I have a bunch of folders and other things in it. Now I imported this. Now this is not one of those ones with multiple layers. This is just a piece of paper that someone scanned. So it's not set up the same way as what I just showed you. But if I say import, and I pick like one of these that I got from Calvin at Drifter Studio, I bring in his Procreate file, and I'm all set to make a new painting because it has all the layers in it ready to go. And of course, you might want to use a different canvas size. You might have to crop your canvas and things like that, because these come in, they're the size they are. Most of them come in a pretty big size. Lisa Bardot's come in 2 sizes. And then there's a set from Retro Supply Company that I put in the chat of papers like this that do the layers that are tileable. They're repeating patterns, so you can use them on any size canvas without stretching or shrinking them or anything. So that's in the chat. So so let me just take this. This is like a silly watercolor thing I did a while ago. And I'm going to copy the canvas. That's under Actions, Add, Copy Canvas. So I got, well, actually, yeah, that's fine. So I'm going to copy the canvas. And then I'm going to go to this watercolor paper that I just imported. I'm going to just hide the painting he had, and I'm going to paste my painting in. And it's not the right size. I'm going to make it bigger. I don't necessarily suggest you make things bigger because they can get blurry. So you would probably want to crop the canvas to fit what you brought in. But just for demonstration purposes, I just want to show you as I turn these paper layers on and off, what a difference it makes. Whoops, I added new layers by accident. What a difference it makes to what that looks like. So this was all painted digitally. And, you know, this is kind of cool looking. It almost looks like real watercolor. But when I turn his paper things on, that looks like something I might make with real paint on paper. But you can see that what I said before, the colors are much stronger, which is really interesting because watercolor generally is somewhat washed out unless you work really hard to get a lot of pigment in. And these papers actually bump up the watercolor texture. So that's what it would look like if I put something I had already drawn into, and I actually like it. I think it looks better bumped up. It's pretty washed out like that when I compare, but there you go. So you just use those and paint and draw in them and put your own things in. Any questions on that before we move on?
I had one question. Donna, at the beginning, you said something and I didn't hear which way you said it. I thought you said either paint before you put the paper on or paint after you put the paper on. Which one did you say?
You put the paper in first because it changes the colors like I was just showing you here. I painted this without the paper. And if these were the colors I wanted, and then I put the paper in, my whole thing changes. And then I'd have to go into my image and try to adjust hue and saturation or change the transparency or something. So definitely you want to pick the paper that you want to use and paint and draw on that paper. It's not that you can't change it, but if you change it and then the colors change a little, you have more work to do if you're not happy with what happened to your colors when you added the paper texture or changed paper texture.
Thank you.
So yes, Beth said the one that I mentioned from Retro Supply Company, that is in the link, and I'll paste those in the Mighty Network with the video and in the YouTube description so everyone can find the links to the brushes that I mentioned and the ones that I use. It's called Phantom Paper from Retro Supply. I haven't bought that one yet, but it looks really good. Okay, you know, you can just have so many things, right? I mean, look at me saying that. I can't show you behind my computer there. I have like 40 started sketchbooks with different papers in them. Okay, the last questions before we go on about using the layers. Okay, so when you buy them or get them from a Skillshare class or wherever, they come with instructions. So you don't have to remember everything I just said, but I hope that helps you understand how they work. So now we're going to look at using brushes for paper texture. Because you don't have to take a picture of a whole sheet of paper or buy something that somebody else scanned a whole piece of paper. You can actually use brushes to create paper texture. And I have a bunch here in the paper textures folder I made. And usually I draw with a gray brush, pretty light gray. For selecting gray, I like to pick the square here, because if you push all the way on the left edge, the saturation is automatically all the way down, and then moving up and down just changes the brightness. So if you're all the way on the left edge, and I usually probably do a 20–30% gray, and you can just add these paper texture brushes, and depending what you have in your background, they add paper texture. So you can say this one has a little bit of fibers in it and a little bit of texture of crinkles. And so I just take that. Now I did it a little bit sloppy. So really what you would do is, I'm going to erase that by 3 fingers, brushing back and forth. What you want to do if you use a paper texture and you want to cover the whole page, and these brushes I got from various places that are in the links that I shared. Some of them I don't know where they got, because I always go into the brush. So when you select the brush, if you tap it again, the brush studio comes up, and at the bottom is about this brush, and it tells you if the person signed it. This came from Delores Art, and she sells brushes, and she has Skillshare classes where she has brushes as part of the classes. So this one is from Delores Art, and she made it. But if you make the brush as big as it can go and zoom your paper way out, you can very quickly go over the whole paper with the texture. And there you've got the paper texture on it. If you want it to be stronger, you can duplicate the layer, and you can merge them together if you want. And then again, if you want, you can use the other tricks that we saw in the other papers that we bought, and we can change the blend mode to multiply. We can make another copy, change the blend mode to color burn, maybe lower the opacity on them. And then I'll go down to a new layer and try some painting with colors with, let's try a watercolor brush. Okay. So if I turn I'm going to group these so I can turn them off. So if you want to group layers, you select one, swipe right on the other or more than one, and click group. If I turn that group off, it changes a little bit. Because I have the opacity down pretty low. If I turn the opacity up more, it changes, it shows up more. And then remember, the multiply one basically affects the blank paper, and the color burn layer basically affects the painted areas. Also, you'll notice that, delete that. Also, you'll notice both of my paper layers are the same, gray, because I just duplicated it. If we looked at the way the other people did it, because why not learn from them? Their multiply layer was very light. So I can go into hue, saturation, and brightness, and I can raise the brightness a little on my multiply layer so that the paper isn't as bold of a texture on it. And the color burn layer was a darker gray. So again, I can select that layer and go into hue, saturation, and I can turn the brightness down on it. And can you see how the more I turn the brightness down on the color burn layer, the more the texture shows and the more it pops up it pops up the saturation and the brightness, I guess. I'm not sure. Maybe it makes it a little darker of the color. But anyway, so now with those 2 layers that I just made with a brush, I have something very similar to the ones that were bought. Now, this is not a watercolor paper, or if it is, it would be a hot, kind of hot press. Watercolor paper usually has more crinkles in it than fibers showing, but I have had some hot press papers. Hot press are the flatter, smoother watercolor papers that have this kind. So you're not limited to, you know, watercolor paper. Yeah, this is so does everyone understand what I just did? How I made the 2 layers and kind of copied what one of those other ones did and set them to different layer blend modes and so forth to make my own paper? Any questions on that? Okay.
Yeah, why is the BR and brush faded on top when it's on top of the pink?
Because the pink is on top of the black layer.
I thought it had something to do with the paper, sorry.
Yeah, no, it has nothing to do with the paper. I just put the pink layer, painting layer on top of the black layer. So if I move the black layer on top of the pink layer, then the black stays black. So even though like in real watercolor, the black would probably show through very strong black because most watercolor paints are quite transparent. Not all. Yellows will do this in real watercolor paint. Yellows are almost never completely transparent. But yeah, so you can just switch the layer if you want one to be prominent or etc. So yeah, it's just the layer stacking. I just want to show you some more cool stuff you can do with this. So these are some free brushes. So if you want to mess around, this brush actually comes with Procreate. It's a really good one to play with for making watercolor kind of texture. And oddly enough, it's called the soft pastel brush in the sketching folder. And you can use that just like I did. So let me turn off these layers and I'll make a new layer. I'll pick a pretty light gray and I'll go into, I move my sketching folder. I move that brush into my paper textures folder so I could find it easier. So here's the soft pastel brush. It comes in Procreate in the sketching folder. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to pick that brush. You can see that it has a texture like that. If I click on who it is, it doesn't say anything because I made a copy of it. I don't know. I guess if you make a copy of a brush, it loses where it came from. But I know this is the copy of the one that came with Procreate. So I'm going to go into that. I'm going to put the brush size all the way up. I'm going to make my paper really small and I'm just going to go quickly over it. You can use your finger. I have that turned off because I keep doing stuff by accident with my fingers, but you can use your finger to paint too. And now I have a layer of texture that I can duplicate. I didn't get them quite even. So if it bothers me that it looks like that, I can take one of the layers and rotate it a few times. And then stretch it out. I can do whatever I want, you know, to get textures that I want. I can even do like one of the samples we looked at. I can even make another layer and pick another brush. This one is one I got from Skillshare, Jen's Cotton Paper. I can, you know, paint like that. But like I said, for covering the whole thing, make the brush big, make your paper small, and it's like super fast to paint it. So you can see this one has more of a watercolor kind of paper texture. Yeah, and you can do the same things I just said. You can make multiple layers, change you can go into the transforms, change the hue and saturation, make it lighter or darker. You can go into the blending modes and pick different blending modes, multiply, darker, color burn. You can change the opacity of them. And then you go down underneath and you see what happens if you take like paintbrushes. Here's the watercolor brush. You can see textures coming in that. I can try other different kind of watercolor brush. I can try like more solid, like a gouache brush or a dry brush technique. And just a really solid brush. And even on the really solid brush, it adds some texture to it. So, okay, so all the same thing, you can delete these layers. And I want to show you some other fun stuff you can do with this because it doesn't have to be watercolor paper. these are free, and the links that I put in there, I got these really cool gesso brushes and they're free. And I Googled any brushes you want, Google it, and you'll find probably some for free, some for not free. There's all these cool gesso texture brushes in there. And again, I pick a gray, make the brush big, make the paper small. I can gesso my whole paper. And now I can change that to multiply mode, lower the opacity, and again, go underneath it and paint and stuff with different colors. And we can pick just a different paintbrush that I have there. Look at the gesso pattern. And depending on what I do with the opacity of it, it shows up more or less. And depending what blend mode I use, it changes things in all different ways. Some of them look like real gesso, and some of them just make really cool effects that you maybe can't do on paper. I love like drawing stuff and painting stuff and then just playing with layer blend modes and see what happens. So I can change the layer blend mode on my painting as well as on my gesso layer. So, you know, I can find one I like, I can lower the opacity. So it's like endless fun. And, you know, some gesso is gray and white and comes out looking like that, more colored. But again, I can pick the layer that I made for my gesso and choose hue, saturation, and brightness, and I can move it brighter or darker. Now, what's really funny is depending what blend mode you have, you might be surprised. Look, when I pull this up to brighter, it's getting darker. When I pull it down to darker on the brightness, it's getting lighter. Why is that? Because I have it set to the difference blend mode, which does the opposite. So these are all like really fascinating. Let's go in again. It's in the magic wand, adjustments, hue, saturation, brightness, and, you know, different blend mode, different effects. So gesso brushes are really cool. And the other thing that I find really fun to work with is in my paper textures, I saved a couple of canvas brushes that I got for like painting with acrylic or something. Same thing. That one went way too light. Oh yeah, I have my thing set to low my layer set to low opacity and multiply. So no wonder it's not showing up. But look at that. It's just like you're painting on a canvas. And again, you know, all the stuff is the same. So there's all kinds of paper, canvas, gesso textures that you could do to create anything you wanted. Yeah, so that's all of that. There's all kinds of paper brushes. Like I said, that I got for free from Skillshare classes, from the links that I gave you for places where I bought them and found free ones. You just Google paper texture brushes Procreate and you'll find a bunch. I did a bunch here, but it's low opacity, and I'll turn it to normal so you can see some of the different textures I had from brushes. A little bit of watercolor with flex, smooth with flex, a little bit more watercolor, like more of a cold press, darker flex. Different watercolor papers have different patterns on them. Yeah, and so goof around with them, find them, and, you know, play around. Yeah. So that's the three things. Is the layers. When you buy them, they have all the layers together. The brushes that you can paint the texture on, and then you can scan your own, but you can also find papers. Like, this is not the gesso brush. This was a gesso paper I found. So you can find papers where people just scanned papers and they don't have all those layers made. So if I go up here to add and insert a file, and I go back to my paper folder, I have all these other papers that I got off the internet in different places. I don't even know what they all are. Some of them I know what they are, some I don't. I just, have a folder for papers. And so I just pick one. And now I've brought in another layer. It's underneath that one. So I've got a light layer and a dark layer, and I can mess around changing my opacity, my layer modes, and see how those combine. So you can get plain scans of paper off the internet, get your own, or use a brush and make your own unique ones. So I do a combination of both. I wanted to show you this last, and then we can, this is a thing I did from, I took several paper cut classes on Procreate on Skillshare. One was from Lisa Bardot, and she had her class came with a bunch of paper textures. So some of these are her paper textures. And look how I have like a different paper texture on the different parts of this. This one has dots. The background's like a watercolor one. This is more speckly. And if you look in my layer stack, you'll see that here and there I have a color layer. And this one I have set to linear light. Who knows? I liked the way it looked when I did that. Which one is that? It's the one that's on all these layers of the face. And it only covers the face because I selected all the layers of the face and I made a layer mask. I made a mask to block out that texture on everything else. I did the same thing on this one, which changed the shade of just the main face, and I decided not to use it because I thought more contrast, I liked it better darker for having more contrast. This one way on the bottom basically covers just about everything. I got another group way down here. So you can see I used a lot of these in here, and some of them cover the whole page, and some of them, and this one has a clipping mask, so it only covers whatever in the body there. And you can do all kinds of things like that. If you don't want to just use it for the whole paper.
Donna, I have a question about that. I was trying to type it out and it's too
Yeah, go
hard.
ahead.
So, because on the one hand, we've heard that the paper textures have to be at the top of the stack, right? Basically, your art needs to be below the texture.
Right.
And so here you've got layers of images
Right.
that appear to be physically stacked, as if you had cut these from paper and
Right.
kind of layered
And
them
they
up.
are in that order in the stack here.
So the nose is on top of the
Yes.
thing between the eyes
You can
is on
see I'm
top
at the
of
bottom of my stack. There's the grass. The name is in the back because it doesn't overlap with anything.
Yep,
So it
yep.
doesn't matter where it is. So, but at the bottom is the grass. And then there's a texture that goes on the grass and the background. So that's over the grass and the background, but it's behind the other layers. So it doesn't change. It doesn't change the carrot, for example, because the carrot is on top of that layer. So it's making it look like this background is different paper because I put that texture behind my other things. Then, okay, so on the, whatever layer this is, that's the rabbit's body. And I put a paper layer there with polka dots, and I used a clipping mask so that the polka dots only show inside the rabbit's body. If I turn the clipping mask off, the polka dots go everywhere on the background. You can't see them not as much because the background had the other texture, but they don't go on the face. Why? Because the face is on higher in the layer stack. So it's on top of the polka dots. So turn that clipping mask back on and that hides the polka dots on the rest. yeah, and so I just stack things up and put the papers above what I want to color with them, but below everything else. So basically, when you draw this, you do have to get all the layers in the right order. I tend to do it backwards because I tend to start by drawing the smaller shapes, and then I have to turn them off to draw the larger shapes because they're blocking, you know. So I guess the best way to do it would be start with the larger shapes. In this particular one, and a lot of these, I traced a photo of my rabbit. Now, of course, it doesn't look like I traced a photo because I wasn't being that precise. But I wanted to, you know, get the ears and the nose and everything in the right place. So as I was drawing, yeah, I guess that's why I start with the smaller things, because that doesn't hide the photo. But yeah, the challenging part of this is making sure the layers are stacked up in the right order, and you may have to move the layers a lot, you know, because you messed up. So like if I started to work on this piece and I drew it, you know, up here, it covers the dark face and it messes up because the layers are in the wrong order. So I can't tell you how I figured out how to do this. I watched a few classes, and but I do not automatically draw everything in the right layer. I move the layers around, and I do, in this case, usually when I said if you're going to do painting, put the paper in first and then paint. And in this case, I draw the whole thing with no textures. I'll show you another one I have. I draw the whole thing with no textures, and then I add the textures. And so this one has no shadows or textures yet. It's just the flat layers. So this is what I would do first. I would draw all the parts of the person or the animal, the nose, the cheeks, the hair parts. I would draw all those parts first before I even mess around with shadows and textures. So this is very, it can be less complicated. The thing I was trying to do was make these look like real people, so I needed a lot of layers. But you can do other things in your drawings where you don't have so many layers, when you just want one part of it to be a different texture than the other. But anyway, that's it for papers. Beth said the Bardot class is worth the price of Skillshare. Oh yeah, I agree. And also, right, Skillshare right now has a month free if you've never signed up before. So if you sign up for a month, gosh, if you're in August, try it next month. And then spend the whole month going through all the Procreate classes you can and getting the brushes and papers and things that the teachers offer you in their classes. Lisa Bardot's class on paper cutting is really, really good. Yes. Most of her classes are on her own website and they're free, but she just started teaching on Skillshare. Yeah. So yeah, definitely worth getting a free month on Skillshare. And if you did it once before, yeah, Liz Kohler Brown has great classes for Procreate. Brenda Bakker, I said, Jennifer Nichols. Those are some of my favorite Procreate teachers. And then nothing to do with anything we're doing here. But Ira Marks has some great comics classes on there too. So yeah, thanks Beth for putting all the stuff in the chat. So yeah, Ira Marks has great comic classes on there too, including one on making a book proposal and pitching to publishers and an agent. So yeah, this is so much fun, isn't it? I mean, it's a lot of stuff, so it could be frustrating if you know, trying to learn it from scratch, but.
Okay, dumb question. I'm on Zoom, not Zoom, we're all on Zoom. I'm on my iPad watching Zoom, and I don't see, I've done on my computer how I save the chat on the
Okay,
iPad.
in the chat window, you have the chat window
Okay,
open?
I did, hold on, yeah.
In the chat window, all the way on the bottom, on the right, whoops, I just lost the chat window. There's a little 3 dots that are stacked up like what they call.
I don't see it.
No, not on an iPad.
Not on the iPad.
Oh, well, I'll save the chat right now and give it to, and post it. How's
Great,
that?
thank you. Because
And
so many
I'll-
names.
Yeah, because there's so many names. I just saved the chat, so I'll post it on the Mighty Network with the video. Yeah. And
I have a
will-
question also.
And I will try to get
Um,
all the names I mentioned typed up to include with the, what's it called? YouTube video as well.
I have a question. Like, I love to work
Mhm.
with like colored pencils or ink on this kind of rough, toothy. This is a fake. It says
Uh-huh.
rough recycled. Are there textures? Like, if I took a picture of this, would I
You
be
can
able to?
do
Or are
that,
people
yes.
doing rough?
All the people who you buy these from either scanned or took photos of pictures themselves and did what we just did today. So that's how they made them. Yes, they
Mhm.
took pictures, they took papers they liked. In fact, Calvin at Drifter Studios, he even tells you what brand of paper he used. Like he's got St. Petersburg watercolor, and I don't know what the
Mhm.
others are, because they all have different textures. So yeah, you can totally do that. Of course, you can Google it because someone may have already done it, and then you don't have to do it yourself.
That would be a lot easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
thank, so informative. Thank, wow, you're really, you know a lot about Procreate. That's amazing. I haven't been coming to
Yeah,
the classes.
I just Googled it, and there's 20 free paper and canvas on Procreate Folio. There's 3 recycled paper textures every Tuesday. So if
yeah,
just
On
Googling what you're
Procreate
looking
Folio?
for.
Google
Really
what
dumb
you want
question,
and-
Donna.
Yeah, Betsy?
I know you guys already know this, but once you see all the papers, I don't understand what you do next. Download it. I'm on the one that Susan just mentioned, the 20 free papers.
Yes.
I don't know what to do with it once I see it.
Okay, so you downloaded it
Yeah, where did it
on
go?
your iPad?
Mm-hmm.
It goes into a downloads folder. So
Okay.
if you downloaded it in a browser and you're using Safari, after you download it, a little icon should come up. Let me pin my screen again and I'll show you. Gosh, I got to find something to download. Free paper Procreate. I don't want brushes. I want free ground. Okay, so let's go to this and see what they got here. I don't see a download. I'm trying to find something to download.
Okay.
See if I can get it in there.
Free paper texture Procreate. Okay, let's sign. Okay, 20. Yeah, this is probably the one you saw, Susan.
Yeah, I think it is.
20 free papers. This is one I have in the list.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So you go through and you find where the download link is. Okay, right here.
Yep.
There are different ways. This person has these all in Google Drive. So when you open them up, they open in Google Drive. So what you need to do is, yeah, so that makes it a little more complicated, but it's a PNG file. So you click this one, you open it, and then up here in the menu, you can open it in Procreate. You can send a copy to yourself in email. It's just
Okay.
just Google Drive. Most of them don't do that. Most of them
Okay.
don't do it that way. But yeah, because people put their files up for you to download in different places. They might have a real website where you click on it and it does an actual download to your downloads folder. But if people don't have that, then sometimes you have to use what they did. So here's another one that's free. So I'm going to put in 0 and say, I want this on Gumroad, and I have to put in my email address.
Sorry.
It's okay. I don't like doing it. Free paper textures, view content. So this one's a zip. Okay, paper textures, colors in black and white. So I click download on it. Says, do you want to download it? Yes. Now notice this little icon comes up here.
Right.
So when I click on it, I can see my downloads. And when I click on the magnifying glass here, it goes into my Finder search thing and I can click on it. And you can't use a zip, but there's stuff inside it, if you didn't know that. And now it opened it. So I still have the zip and here's the opened folder. And I have all these papers in here. So now, when I'm in Procreate, I can say import. And I go to my downloads folder on my iPad. And this is kind of like what you do on a computer. Go in my downloads folder. I can sort things by name and date. And so here's the paper textures black and white folder that I just got. And I go in it and I pick one of the papers and it opens in Procreate. And you'll see this is, like I said, these are just the plain papers. So you will have to, change the blending modes, set the transparency and so forth.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna try that.
Try it and ask questions on the, Mighty Network if you, need help. Because if you have a question, 10 other people that are watching this video on YouTube or something will have the same question.
Thank you.
So. Yeah. Oh, that's a cool idea. I have a few handmade sketchbooks too. Carol said she found a handmade sketchbook. I have a couple of sketchbooks with handmade paper. I should dig them out and try to take pictures or scan them.
Yeah, I'm excited about that because I couldn't stop touching it. So that's how I knew I had to buy it, even though I was 2,000 miles away from home.
Yeah. Well, if you didn't, you'd never find it again, right? If it was at Goodwill, it might be totally one of a kind, handmade. It's handmade paper. It doesn't exist in duplicate.
Yeah, Goodwill. That was one of my requests of my daughter was I need to go to a Goodwill in Denver. Never been. One of my thing.
Yeah, so I hope that was interesting. You probably will have to watch it again, especially if you want to make your own layers and set the blending modes and everything for them. But yeah, so you can use brushes or paper, whole scans of pieces of paper, or you can buy them already made. So it's all completely up to you how much work you want to do. My husband always says this: you always pay. You pay in time or you pay in money. So the thing is, if you pay in time, you can get something completely unique. If you pay in money, you're getting something that other people have. But I don't think that's so important for watercolor paper to have like your own totally unique watercolor paper for Procreate. But it's fun to mess around because like I showed you, if you just go randomly through those blend modes, I do that all the time. I posted something a couple weeks ago that I had painted a red thing. It's right here, the thing I painted this, and then I put a photo in here in Procreate, and it was black and white, and I went through the blend modes and it turned bright turquoise and burgundy, and it looked so great. It was just me like dragging through the blend modes with these paintings I made in the background. And so it's happy accidents. Beth's not looking. Beth, you gotta look. Happy accidents in my shirt.
Love that.
Okay, that's it. I'm stopping the recording.
Thanks, Donna.